Salute, my Quick Classics friends. This is your friendly neighborhood PhD, Judd Burton. Uh, Picking up where we left off with the first portion of the Roman Empire, known as the Principate era. The second portion of Roman history is often referred to as the Dominate period because of the title Dominus, uh, which was utilized more frequently, and also because of some of the Oriental stylings that had been adopted during this time as well. And of course, the title Lord was used throughout the Near East. So this period from 284 to 476 is the period of the Dominate, sometimes called Late Antiquity as well, or at least a part of Late Antiquity. For more on that, you can read works, especially by Peter Brown. But essentially, what you have here is an Eastern Empire and a Western Empire. And by the time you get to 284 AD, the system in place to govern the empire was the Tetrarchy, where you had two emperors and two co-regents that assisted in the governance of those sections of the empire just to better administrate it. And in 284, Diocletian is the emperor, and Diocletian was probably best known in history as one of the staunchest persecutors, just in terms of his policies of Christians. There is some evidence to suggest that his underling Galerius sort of goaded him into it and used Christians as a scapegoat for some of the issues that the Roman Empire was dealing with in the 3rd century AD. At any rate, Galerius prompts him to consult the oracle at Delphi and consult Apollo. And the oracle there tells him to lay the blame on the Christians and to go after them. And so, under this edict that Diocletian issues, Christians are to be, at the very least, rounded up and kept from whatever nefarious ends that the empire thought they were up to. But Diocletian encouraged each of the tetrarchs not to resort to unnecessary killings. But again, you can look into this and see that Galerius was very instrumental in manipulating Diocletian, and eventually there were probably about 3,500 Christians in total that were killed during what became known as the Great Persecution. Diocletian is really kind of the hinge on which the Principate going into the Dominate swings. And you can't talk about Diocletian, of course, without talking about Constantine. And Constantine, surprisingly enough, was a pupil of Diocletian's and a favorite at one time. Constantine's father, who ruled from Britain and western France, had sent his son to Diocletian to learn the political arts, statecraft, and of course the military arts. And so under Diocletian's tutelage, he did so and became a favorite of Diocletian's. However, with the passing of Diocletian, Constantine became public enemy number one, really, under Galerius. And Galerius, before he designated him as such, tried to send him on all these dangerous missions to get him killed. And there's even a story from Lactantius about Galerius trying to feed Constantine to the lions. If we're to believe that, if it actually happened, and Constantine defeated the lion and rode off, hamstrung all the horses in the district so Galerius couldn't follow him back to the west, where Constantine could gather his strength and come back, which he did in a series of political and military maneuvers, culminating in the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312, in which he enters Rome under the sign of Jesus. Notably, the sign that he was supposedly told in a vision, related in sources like Lactantius and Eusebius, where he was told to put the abbreviation of Christ in Greek, the chi and the rho, on the shields, and that he would be able to defeat the forces of Maxentius, which he did successfully. Now, Constantine is a pretty controversial figure for a number of reasons. And I'm not here to debate whether his conversion was genuine. Ultimately, that's between him and God. But there does seem to be some evidence that it was genuine, if we're to believe Eusebius and, again, Lactantius. But I'm here to dispel some of the Da Vinci Code myths about Constantine. He was, at one time in his life, a devotee of the Sol Invictus cult, whose primary celebration was in the winter solstice season. But at any rate, Constantine probably saw Christianity, whether he was genuinely converted or not, saw Christianity as a way to politically patch the kingdom back together, or the empire back together, and put it under one banner. Constantine is also probably best remembered for calling the Council of Nicaea, in which he invited the bishops in the Mediterranean basin. I think there were about 1,800. About 250 answered the call to attend, and the main reason was to address the heresy of a priest named Arius in Egypt, who had some strange ideas about the substance, the divine substance of Jesus. But also to develop an orthodox credo under which tenets Christianity would base itself, so that there would be a sort of consensus. And this happened in 325 in Nicaea. Contrary to popular belief, again, dispelling any Da Vinci Code fallacies, the canon of the Bible was not decided at the Council of Nicaea. Most of it, in fact, had already been decided upon and circulated. But it was in 331 that Constantine convened a committee to publish 50 copies of Bibles. So that's probably where a lot of the confusion comes from, aside from the movies itself. But Constantine is a pivotal figure because he marks the ascendancy of Christianity as the official religion of the empire, and the beginning of the descent of public paganism. Paganism was certainly still around, mystery traditions were still around, but you're going to see those gradually going to the wayside. And after Constantine, you're looking at emperors that took the throne who no longer had any sort of connection with the Julio-Claudian emperors. You had the so-called soldier emperors, people who were not even from Rome proper, or there were people from the east also who became emperors as well. But from here on out, you begin to see the East begin to flourish more and the West to begin to diminish. And not that the East didn't have its own problems. A lot of these problems stem from interaction with the so-called barbarian tribes, many of whom were conscripts in the Roman army. And quite simply, Rome made a lot of promises about delivering things like land and baubles and, in some cases, citizenship to these people, and the resources and the money began to run thin, and when Rome couldn't deliver, the barbarians came to collect. Some notable examples of this include the confrontations with the Goths in the east, culminating in the Battle of Adrianople in 378, and actually the death of the Emperor Valens after the crossing of the Danube by hordes of Goths that Rome was simply not equipped to handle logistically. But over the course of the next 150 years, you have a score of these kinds of circumstances emerging where Rome has to deal with various indigenous tribes of Europe, the Goths, the Visigoths, the Vandals, even some Asiatic peoples, notably the Huns. Most people would be familiar with Attila. But the long story short is simply this, that by the time you get to the 5th century, the Western Empire is really hearing the death knell. Many people at that time in Rome were saying that the barbarians were coming down on them because they had abandoned the old gods. But you had this bishop, Augustine, in Hippo in North Africa, who was literally watching this while it happened, and he said, "No, you got it all wrong. The reason that this is happening is it's a judgment from God, and it's because Romans had held on to their old pagan gods for too long." Consequently, Augustine's Civitate Dei, the City of God, it's very interesting to look at this, but it's also, amongst other things, a philosophy of history, and it's the most complete record we have of ancient mythology, Greco-Roman mythology, that is, because Augustine goes through the various deities in a sort of biographical fashion. But it all comes crashing down in the West in 476 with the last of the emperors, kid by the name of Romulus Augustulus, who's defeated by a Gothic general named Odovacar. And so gradually the old Roman system dies out in the West, and the indigenous tribes like the Goths, the Germanic tribes, the Celts, begin to reassert their control over those old Roman provinces. But it must be pointed out that the East continues to flourish under the auspices of the Byzantine Empire, and will continue to do so until 1453, when Constantinople is laid siege and sacked by the Turks.